Is the commitment of one of LSU's most highly touted and one of the most important recruits in the 2024 class potentially in jeopardy?
You are Locked On LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Well, thank you for making Locked On LSU your first listen every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, but don't forget, you can also find us on YouTube as well. So wherever you watch, whenever you watch, however you watch, just appreciate you for making Locked On LSU your first listen every single day and for liking, commenting, subscribing, and reviewing the podcasts. My name is Caroline Fenton, and I'm your host, as I am every single day. You can follow me on Twitter at Caroline Fenton1. You can also follow along with the podcast for updates at Locked On LSU on Twitter. Also want to let y'all know that today's edition of Locked On LSU is brought to you by Bird Dogs. Go to birddogs.com/lockedoncollege, and when you enter promo code LOCKEDONCollege, all one word, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE, they will throw in a free custom Bird Dogs Yeti-style tumbler with every single order. Used mine this morning for my coffee. It's great. It's perfect. But let's get into it because you may have seen a headline that made you a little bit uneasy, maybe had yourself asking a few questions. Because that's exactly how I felt when I saw a headline from an article that says University of Miami recruiting, Colin Hurley, commitments, and more. And I'm thinking, well, that's really interesting. Colin Hurley is a quarterback that's committed in the 2024 class for LSU. It was a three-star quarterback that reclassified, originally in the 2025 class, reclassified in the 2024 class. So that is why Colin Hurley maybe doesn't have the same four-star, five-star kind of juice, or at least ranking in the 2024 class. It's because he did reclassify. But we had Brian Smith, Locked On's official recruiting insider, on the podcast a couple weeks ago that was bragging on exactly what makes Colin Hurley so special, what makes him such a big and important pickup for LSU. First and foremost, part of the reason why he's so important is because Brian Kelly wants that go-to guy, that one quarterback in every single class. But there are so many intangible things that Brian told us that Colin Hurley possesses that also just adds that much more value to Colin Hurley. He's not afraid of the competition that he's inevitably going to be walking into when he gets to LSU. His arm talent, his ability to extend plays with his legs. You can find a full breakdown of Colin Hurley, my conversation with Brian Smith a couple weeks ago. You can find that at your preferred podcast platform and also on YouTube as well. So you may have asked yourself a few questions. At least I asked myself a few questions of, is Colin Hurley's commitment to LSU solid if he's still looking around at other places, if he's still looking at potentially maybe a Miami? Well, Brian Smith, again, Locked On's official recruiting insider, will join us to break down the latest on Colin Hurley. This was Brian Smith. And joining Locked On LSU now is our favorite guest every single week, Brian Smith, Locked On's official recruiting insider. Brian, always appreciate you for joining the show. I know the people always appreciate you for joining the show. And right now is the perfect time because the rumor mill is rumor milling. We saw some news come out a couple days ago of Colin Hurley potentially taking visits elsewhere. Of course, Colin Hurley is a quarterback recruit coming in the 2025 class, and he is an absolute monster, reclassified in the 2025 class. So what have you heard on the latest on Colin Hurley?
Well, he had all the offers before he even moved up from 25 to 24 class, and it just
24 class,
yeah. He committed last summer or last fall, whatever, to LSU, which kind of surprised me. I know him really well, but he hasn't had. I talk to his dad and different people every now and then. Nobody's going to stop recruiting a kid that can throw the football 60 mile an hour. Like, he's got a cannon. So LSU's just battling other schools. Miami is where he was born. That's the school most rumored, but I'm sure, and I don't know, but I'm sure there's some others. I did communicate with Hurley a couple of days ago, talking to him about some other recruits, and he mentioned LSU. He didn't mention anybody else. So that's probably a good sign, but just note in today's world, because quarterback play is so freaking important. If you don't have quarterback play, you're done. There's going to be teams coming after him. He has not lined up any visits. It's just LSU, but that's just part of the process, man. It is what it is. If you're going to get great players, you're going to have great teams come after them.
And that's what I've read. I've read several different articles from, people, the Miami brass who cover the Miami Hurricanes, and they've couched all of this information by saying, look, we know Colin Hurley loves LSU. We know he's committed to LSU. We know he loves LSU,
Yep.
but at least keeping his options open. So just a little bit of, recruiting inside info from you. What does that mean? Not necessarily just for Colin Hurley, but just overall, when a player is a couple years out from coming in, when he continues to keep his recruitment open.
That's called being smart, because college coaches are what the reasons they go to places. And I asked Colin why he picked LSU. He liked the assistant coaching staff, the way LSU recruited him. And of course, playing in the SEC West, Tiger Stadium, all that too. But it's about relationships. People want to hear that kids pick the logo on the shirt. They do not. They pick the coaches representing that logo. That's just reality. Coaches leave, they come, they go. Kids always want to make sure they have backup options in case those coaches take, if one of the LSU coaches gets a head job for $4 million a year, he gone. Mm-hmm. That's just reality. And that's why these kids do that. I have this conversation with numerous people. I had it with Colin over a year ago before he ever committed. And it's no different. So it's hard for college coaches to hear that. But, if the money they're making, they got to leave when they get those offers. So that's the main reason.
And how do coaches react to that? Maybe to some news that their recruits are still open, taking other visits. Is that LSU saying, hey, do your thing, sow your wild oats, go have fun, go enjoy your recruits or your recruiting visits, and we'll see you in a couple months? Or is that LSU doubling down and recruiting him even further?
I think
it's kind of differ per coach.
Well, it is different for coaches. Like I'm buddies with one of the kids committed to Clemson. You're not even allowed to take an unofficial visit if you're a Clemson commit. You're automatically, your scholarship is pulled. Every school, so Clemson's extreme. They're extreme.
That is so Dabo.
Yeah, that really is. Depending on the kid, like Ohio State had that rule for a while too, but Jeremiah Smith, who I think is the best player in the country, committed to them. You can't, he's unbelievable. He wants to take some other visits. You're not going to pull his, there are exceptions for special players.
Right.
So quarterback gets real testy because, again, if you miss a quarterback, that's a different deal. I'm curious what Brian Kelly would do if it was official. I don't even know what school it would be, and Hurley wanted to visit another school. If he publicly made that statement, what would LSU do? It's too late to get the other kids at quarterback because pretty much everybody's committed that they would want. They're kind of stuck. So it gets into a really, really murky situation because you just don't want to go a class without a quarterback. You want as many bullets in the gun as possible. So, yeah, it does change depending on timing, depending on the school and the position too.
And that's something that Brian Kelly has said several times. His goal, what he wants to do in every single recruiting class, is land a solid 4-star, 5-star quarterback, that go-to guy, that one guy in every single class. Yep. So let's say hypothetically, since it's obviously not out of the realm of possibility, Colin Hurley takes a visit to, let's say, Miami. That's been the one school other than LSU that's kind of been slated to Colin Hurley. Let's say he goes to Miami, visits Miami, loves Miami, commits to Miami, decommits from LSU. What does LSU do from there?
Well, you still have other options too. If you think for 1 second there aren't people in the back office or whatever that aren't scouting and looking at other kids or communicating with other kids, I got some swampland to sell you too. That's just, you have to do it on both ends. There's no politically correct part of this when it comes to recruiting, but at the same time, you still recruit Colin. You can't sign, I think it's the 20th or whatever this year for National Signing Day in December. Doesn't matter who he's committed to, you can still recruit him. LSU would just re-recruit him on the same principles that they tried to bring him in on first time. It's the LSU tradition. It's a chance to play quarterback in Death Valley. Again, this is not rocket science. It's not hard to sell LSU. So you just do what you've done. And if it doesn't work out, so be it. Maybe he's not the guy for you anyway.
And last one for you on this. I know that there are some just recruiting junkies out there, LSU fan recruiting junkies that may have seen some of those headlines of Colin Hurley potentially taking visits to Miami, and they probably were hitting the panic button. What is your message to LSU fans that might be concerned about those headlines?
It's part of the process, man. Recruiting today is so much different than it even was 5 years ago, let alone 10 to 20 years ago. Most kids take visits, especially Florida kids, after they commit. I know nobody wants to hear that either,
Mhm.
but Florida kids are the most difficult to recruit by a landslide. So it's part of the process. If you don't like that, don't watch recruiting, because it's only going to get worse, because the kids this is the one time that they have leverage, especially the elite players like Hurley. What are you going to do? Not recruit him? You have to have those kind of guys to win SEC titles. So you just got to roll with the punches. It is what it is. And it's a long way to signing day.
It is, and I know that a whole lot of people are losing sleep because of it, but that is the beauty of it all. Flipping to the other side of the ball, LSU's 2024 recruiting class, their highest rated defensive lineman, and Brian says that he is an absolute monster. So we'll get Brian's thoughts on him coming up next. So here's my favorite thing about Bird Dogs. Not only do they make you look good, they've got stretch khaki shorts with a built-in inside to make your shorts fit slimmer through the thigh. They give you a nice little sculpted look. It's the summertime. You want those legs to be out. You want those legs to be looking good. They do the exact same thing as maybe like a Lululemon short would do, but they do it way better because they fit way better. They fit better than regular shorts. They're not made with those stiff, restricting cotton or that khaki material that always gets wrinkly or maybe doesn't feel very comfortable. No, Bird Dogs is made of the most comfortable and breathable fabric, and they look just like khaki. So that's one of the best things. If you're going to work, or if you have something nice to go do, maybe you're going to the golf course, well, you will look nice in Bird Dogs, but also you'll feel pretty great too. I love Bird Dogs. They're for men, but I have a couple pairs because they're just that comfortable. One of my favorite things about Bird Dogs is they look very nice, but also I just wear them laying around the house. I wear them on the couch when I'm watching a game, when I'm watching LSU in the Super Regional this weekend. I will probably be wearing my Bird Dogs because they look nice, but they're just as comfortable like every other pair of pajama pants that I own and watch the LSU Tigers in. So go to birddogs.com/lockedoncollege and enter promo code LOCKEDONCollege, all one word, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE, for a free Yeti style tumbler with your order. That is birddogs.com/lockedoncollege for a free Yeti style tumbler. You won't want to take your Bird Dogs off, we promise you. And that tumbler is the best. I have one. I love it. I used it in my coffee this morning, brought it with me to work, kept my coffee hot all day long. I love it. It's great. And the product is great as well. birddogs.com/lockedoncollege. Well, thanks again for making Locked On LSU your first listen every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Every dayers. Tomorrow on the podcast, we'll get a full breakdown of LSU Super Regional matchup against Kentucky. But Brian Smith, Locked On's official recruiting insider, is with us now. Brian, you messaged me about this guy. You're like, let's talk about him because he is a name that people are going to want to know. When we look at the 2024 class, I don't think a lot of people have, honed in on one guy of, oh my gosh, this guy's going to be a monster. I think we're all focused on the season, on the 2023 class, some freshmen that could have breakout seasons this year, similar to a Harold Perkins or a Will Campbell or a Mason Taylor. But there is one guy that I'm looking at in this recruiting class that you say is a total monster that plays a pretty important position, especially with the kind of football that LSU wants to play. And that's Demarion Johnson, a 3-star defensive lineman out of New Iberia. What do you know about him? What do you love about him?
Size and power. Think of Louisiana State football historically. What have they always had? A lot of defensive linemen and corners. Mm-hmm. And when you have those two critical positions and LSU's loading up again at DB, they tend to be at the top of the SEC. This is a kid that can come in and play either the nose guard spot or defensive tackle. When I broke down his film, it was interesting. He only uses one move. He just puts both arms into your chest and moves you out of the way. He is just grown man strength. Yeah, I mean, he has no technique and he's dominating, which means he has a very high ceiling. So I'm hoping that he gets a little more used to using different moves and stuff, but LSU's coaching staff is going to be fine with him at D-line. He has so much upside. He'll be a 300-pound player that can play nose or D tackle, move around, even played some defensive end for his high school, and he just mowed over guys. So, again, you can never have enough defensive linemen. That's the old saying, and it's still true. I think people are kind of sleeping on him as a 3-star recruit. I kind of laughed. LSU is famous for taking 3-star kids and putting them in the NFL, and they've actually had more 3-stars make the NFL recently than they have 5-stars. It's just development. A lot of the kids in Louisiana are overlooked too because they're from faraway places and small towns. Mm-hmm. Man, I tell you what, that area over there by Lafayette, New Iberia, and all that is loaded, and he's just another example. So I think he's going to play pretty early for LSU, and it's a big pickup for Brian Kelly and the Tigers.
I always use Justin Jefferson as the example of this kind of kid that really had no other offers, no other options. And I know he's probably more of the exception and not the rule, but he's always the example that I go back to. Hey, don't sleep on those 2 stars, those 3 stars. And I do think that there's almost I don't want to say the word obsession because I don't think that that's fair. There's a hyper focus on the 3 stars, on the 4 stars, on the rankings that you might see on the on-3s, on the 24/7s, on all of the on the rivals, on all the recruiting websites. What do you think is the difference between Jamarian Johnson and maybe a 5-star that everybody knows about? What's that difference, and what can LSU do to unlock that difference between the 3-star and the elite of the elite?
Most of the kids that are 5-star are a little more polished. That's the common term. They've worked with a trainer, or they've got a lot of different technique. This kid is just not polished yet. The physical ability is just obvious. You can watch 3 plays, and when he's walking a 300-pound man back to the quarterback play after play, it's not rocket science.
Right.
He is a very, very strong man. But again, the only thing he does is just lock the kid out and move back. He has no moves, none. So it's just coaching. If he takes to the coaching that LSU provides, he can get paid. He can eventually be an NFL player, because you can't teach the barrel chest, the big legs, the size, and the ability to move in space like he does. So upside through the roof. It's just getting the coaching. The 5-star kids might play a little earlier, but this kid can be an all SEC performer, no question.
And coming up next, I want to get into another defensive player who apparently is pretty high on LSU. We'll get into that with Brian coming up next. Well, thanks again for making Locked On LSU your first listen every single day. Colin Simmons. He's one of the highest rated players in the 2024 class, a 5-star edge rusher out of Duncanville, Texas. He is the top edge rusher in the 2024 class, one of the top players in the state of Texas. And Texas is one of those states like Florida, like Georgia, like Louisiana. If you're a top 10 player in that state, that's really freaking impressive. If you're the top player in state of Idaho, maybe it doesn't carry as much weight as some of those incredibly talent-rich states. Colin Simmons sat down with 24/7 Sports, and he talks about some of the visits that he was taking, or he plans to take, over the next couple of months. Texas A&M is on that list. Oregon, Miami, Alabama, they're all on his list of places that he wants to look. But when asked about places that he really likes, he said, I love LSU. LSU feels like home. He was at the LSU spring game. He got to meet Joe Burrow. He got to meet Angel Reese. He got to meet Jamar Chase. What do you know about Colin Simmons, and what do you know about his recruitment at LSU?
He just hit it off. I've heard the same thing. I don't know him personally, but LSU is always, they've always recruited the Metroplex in Dallas where he's from. And Duncanville is arguably the best program in the state of Texas right now.
Woo,
he's going to be,
that's something.
Well, yeah, it does. They've got a tremendous head coach, and they're always in the state finals, it seems like, and they're just a great football team. So he's their ringleader, which all of a sudden you kind of look at that and you say, well, you put those two together, best program in the state, best player, that kind of narrows it down. He's going to come in as a polished kid, unlike a lot of other guys. He's a pass rush specialist, and LSU targeted him early, and they just hit it off when he came down. They're probably the leader in the clubhouse, but the list you mentioned, man, that's some rough sledding. From Miami to Oregon, he's got visits lined up. I don't really expect him to make an early decision, and even if he does, I'm sure he's still going to get recruited by the Nick Sabans of the world. So LSU's just done a great job so far. I'm curious to see what he says about LSU by the end of June, like comparing them to Alabama or A&M or whatever visits he ends up taking. Because why were they number one first, and did they continue to stay there? This is a guy who comes in and plays right away like a Harold Perkins. He has that kind of ability. So, yeah, this is a big recruitment for Brian Kelly, the Tigers.
Yeah, and that's kind of the tricky thing with recruiting. I think a lot of it also just kind of comes down to timing of who gets the last visit, who gets on your mind early, who can continue to just hammer home LSU. So it's early. It's very early. And that's the tricky thing with recruiting these guys in the 24, 25, even 26 classes is you want to stay at the forefront of their minds. He's taken a visit to LSU. He was there for the spring game. What can LSU do, and what should LSU fans focus on as he continues to go throughout his recruiting process to make sure that LSU is at the forefront of his mind?
What he does, not what he says. This is one of my favorite lines people often talk a big game, but it's what they do. When he gets to the season, regardless how many visits he takes this summer, who's he taking unofficial visits to? LSU's close enough. It's not a short drive by any means to Dallas, but it's close enough he can get to games. That's what I'm going to be looking at. He might make a decision this summer, but I know better with a 5-star defensive end. Everybody's going to continue to recruit him, whether it's Alabama, Oregon, LSU, whatever. If he visits LSU in the fall, that'll tell me what we already know, that they're truly at the top of his board. So let's see if he comes in for one of the big games. And if he does, that would probably make it pretty obvious where he's going to go.
That's always what I'm looking at is, can he get there for a night game at LSU?
Oh,
Because
absolutely.
if he can,
Absolutely.
that's all the problem. Just get him through the door. Once they're in there, if you choose that this is not the place for you, then more power to you, because you're probably a stronger person than I am. Another player in the 2024 class that I am looking at who just took a visit to LSU in early June, that's Jeremiah McClellan. He's a 4-star wide receiver out of St. Louis, which LSU's kind of been bringing in a whole bunch of recruits from the city of St. Louis. What makes Jeremiah McClellan so good?
Speed. He's a track kid. He can absolutely fly. Brian Kelly hired one of the head coaches in St. Louis to come to be on his staff. Yeah. There's your connection. But this is a kid, very, very smart move. Speed changes games in LSU. Again, this isn't shocking. They've always done that. And the receiver room at LSU over the last half dozen years has been ridiculous. So it's not hard to sell that either. Right. But LSU needs another dominant guy. And they've got Hurley and all these guys they're talking about bringing in. They're trying to sell him on the package. So he can go wherever he wants. Again, this is an elite prospect. He's got offers from all the names that you would think in college football. I'm curious to see what they sell him on in terms of the position. Is it going to be slot? Is it going to be outside? I don't know all the particulars. Maybe they're going to recruit him on a position, whatever he wants at receiver, but it doesn't matter. He's a kid. I love his film, and so do about 40 other schools too. So LSU is just one of the handful that are going to get a visit, so they're fortunate.
Yeah, there's a long list of schools that he's looking into and that are on the recruiting trail over the next couple of weeks, taking a visit to Ohio State later this month, to Tennessee later this month. And when I see Ohio State, I think, dang it.
That's the one you don't want to see the most.
If you're a receiver and you're getting offers from Ohio State and you're looking at all of the receivers over the past, 15 years that haven't just gone to the NFL, but have been elite players in the NFL, it's tough to compete with.
Yeah, that's probably the one I would look at. LSU is still, that Joe Burrow season in 19 is probably going to help them. You can make a case for a couple of guys that are LSU Tigers that are now in one Minnesota and one in Cincinnati.
Yeah, two of the best receivers in the league, if not the two best receivers in the league.
Yeah, you could make that argument.
Totally.
Chase, absolutely. So it's still LSU, and I don't know what the kid wants. Maybe he wants warmer weather. Maybe he wants the SEC West. Mm-hmm. But again, you're selling LSU. Don't overcomplicate it.
Right.
If it's not for him, so be it. But if I'm LSU, I don't really trickle into a different category. This is why this program is special. Come see a night game, whatever, this fall. We'll see what happens.
Brian Smith, Locked On's official recruiting insider. Is there a name that I did not mention that LSU fans should know?
To be honest with you, no. Their recruiting board is so massive. I'm not going to just pick one. By the end of this month, I do want to come back on and talk about the totality.
Yeah,
I did an article earlier today talking about most of the kids in June. They take visits the first couple of weeks, but then you get around the 18th to 20th of the month through about the 10th of July is commitment city. There'll be somebody we're talking about randomly on a Saturday night. You'll mess because somebody committed to LSU. It's random. Let's see how many they can get and how many of them they can get. The Colin Simmons of the world could commit too. You don't know. But I expect LSU to get 3 or 4 commitments between now and July 4th at the very least. And there'll probably be some game changers. That's just the nature of the beast. It's going to be a really interesting next couple of weeks.
Well, we will absolutely have you back on to talk about all of the craziness and all of the movement that I know is going to happen in the next couple of weeks. Brian Smith, appreciate you so much. Where can the people find your work?
FB Scout _Florida. Actually just did a little podcast of Mr. Johnson we talked about earlier. He's a great prospect that LSU's got coming in. You can find me mostly on Twitter and then some on Instagram too. Same podcast handle at FB Scout _Florida. Love this time of year. It's great. I really love it.
Yeah, it's a fun time of year. Brian, appreciate you. We'll chat with you soon.
All right. Take care, Caroline.
Well, thanks again for making Locked On LSU your first listen every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Every dayers. Coming up on the next podcast, we will have a full review of LSU at Kentucky, plus what's going on in DC. Why is Brian Kelly there? How is that going to affect LSU? All of that coming up in the next few days on Locked On LSU.